Hi. So this is more, I started doing it as a lightning talk, but it became slightly big, but it is not as big as a full length talk. So yeah, we'll see how much time I take. Yeah, for 10 minutes, I think. Right. So in this talk, I'm going to talk about GitHub Actions. How do you build a CI pipeline for Rails? But more importantly, like to understand the basics of GitHub Actions and what are the terminologies and how do you build a GitHub Actions from first principles. That has been my goal in this talk. So what is GitHub Actions? It is basically a platform to automate developer workflows, right? And mostly, if you have worked with GitHub Actions before, you would have used it mostly for building a CI/CD pipeline. But a CI/CD pipeline is just one of the developer workflows, right? What CI means is continuous integration. When you basically push something to your project, you should be able to run something like rspec and see that you've not broken anything, you do not have any regression. That is continuous integration. CD, continuous deployment, what it basically means is, let's say you merge something into master, and you should be able to uh, you know tentatively be able to be able to deploy that master branch into your staging or production. So this is the CI/CD pipeline, and you can achieve CI/CD pipeline with GitHub Actions. And the best thing is, you already have your code in GitHub, and you could build your CI/CD pipeline, just in another tab in GitHub Actions. And for most of it, it is free, right? uh, Even private projects, it is free. There is some limits to it, but it is free. But okay, another thing that I want to add is, GitHub Actions is not just CI/CD pipeline. uh, it is a sort of serverless compute that you're getting, and you can build a lot of automated lot of developer workflows. Initially, sort of when GitHub Actions was released, so GitHub sort of got afraid that it could be used for Bitcoin mining, or just hosting a server for free of cost. So they actually added a lot of limits so that you could not do that. But I think right now the limits take care of the situation that you won't be able to do sort of things like Bitcoin mining or run a whole server on GitHub Actions. Right. So as I said, GitHub Actions is a way to automate developer workflow. But what do I mean by a developer workflow? Let's say you are sort of a maintainer for a open source project, right? A user of the project uh, submits an issue, right? The developer workflow means that you have to classify it, whether it's a major issue or a minor issue, add a tag saying that is it reproducible, assign it to a contributor, and then when a contributor submits a pull request, that pull request needs to be reviewed, and you should be able to say that whether the bug is fixed or not fixed. Then that pull request has to be merged to master. Somebody has to prepare the release notes, update the version number, and be able to like make it as a package or deploy to production. So there is a lot of things other than coding that a developer has to do, right? And these are organizational tasks, and they're really not as fun as coding, and it could eat up a lot of a developer's time, right? So if there is a new issue, so there are a lot of issues that a developer has to take care, other than coding, which can be easily automated. And we should strive to automate as many organizational tasks as possible. So how do we automate it? You can specify in GitHub Actions that when something happens in or to your repo, these are called events. Let's say if a PR is created, if a new contributor has joined, if a new issue is created, or if a PR has been merged, these are the events, right? And based on these events, you can specify GitHub Actions to respond with actions, something like that, right? For example, when a PR is created, you can say to GitHub Actions, right, run these specs, right? Or if a PR is merged to master, deploy to staging. Or if an issue is created, automatically assign this issue to a particular contributor or a default contributor, which can be yourself, or add a particular tab. So using events and actions, you can automate developer workflow, and that essentially is GitHub Actions. So in GitHub Actions, you can run these workflows like build, test, and publish, and you can run it on a Linux system, Mac OS, Windows, and even an ARM machine, right? These are the containers that are provided, and you could do something called as matrix builds. That means that you can take your code and run it in different environments and run them in parallel, and run it on like maybe different versions of your frameworks or languages, and these are called matrix builds, and you can run it in parallel. So you don't have to wait a long time to see the results, and there is no restriction on which language on which you can run. So obviously GitHub hosts multiple languages, and you could automate the developer workflow on lots of languages. And finally, GitHub Actions has a lot of actions which are provided by the community. Actions could be like running RSpec. That is a community provided. It could be a community provided action, and you could use it without any modification or with some modification, or linter checking errors in the code or things like that. Could There are community provided actions that you can use. Right. So to the basics, like how do you start building GitHub Actions? Let's say you have a GitHub repository. Now you want to basically do CI, continuous integration, to your project, right? You want to start. Where do you start, right? So the first thing what you need to do is create a workflow YAML file, and this workflow YAML file has a specific directory and directory format. It should be in .github directory, and inside that it should be workflows, and you can create the file name anything you want. I have done verify.yaml, or it could be ci.yaml, and it has to be in .yaml format. Now when you create a YAML, I'll come into what goes inside this YAML. But when you create a YAML, right, if you run this YAML file, this is how it will look, right? Each of this YAML file corresponds to workflows, and in this I have only one workflow, and these are multiple runs of this workflow. Now what does a workflow? Let's go in. So let's understand some terminologies. So an YAML file, right, the first thing is you have to specify when do you want to run this YAML file. That is specified in on. So I have specified that whenever there is a commit that gets pushed, run this workflow. What does the workflow mean? Workflow has multiple jobs. Right now, I have only one job, which is called verify. And what does a job consist of? The jobs consist. Okay, and basically, if you look at the UI in GitHub Actions, a job is run like this, and you could see that the name of the job is build, and that job is getting run, and it takes 5 minutes 58 seconds for the job to run. And and a job consists of steps are nothing but series of actions. The the GitHub Actions takes on behalf of you. Here few of the steps are checking out code from the repository. It obviously knows, and it uses this action/checkout v1. And then the next step is setup Ruby. Next step is setup Node, then install some dependencies. There are some commands to install those dependencies. So jobs can have multiple steps. And if you look at how it is run, you can see that there is a almost one-on-one mapping between how the GitHub Actions runs it, and the steps you have created. You can see at the top you have a build, which is the job name that it is running, and you can see the steps, which is checkout code, setup Ruby, setup Node, install dependencies, and set up test database. And run tests is not visible here. I will share my screen and show those as well. And where is it actually running on? It is running on an Ubuntu latest container that is called as the runner. And so all of the job runs on the Ubuntu latest container, and these are the steps that is shown. And each of these steps will use actions. These are community provided actions, actions checkout v1, actions setup ruby, actions setup node. So to summarize, okay, so there is also a one-on-one mapping between the actions that you're specified and the actions that gets run here. For example, in the setup job step, you can see that it has downloaded these actions: actions checkout v1, actions setup ruby v1, setup node v1, and it has actually started running this action for the next step. So to summarize, right, a GitHub, how do you get GitHub Actions to work for you? GitHub Actions has a workflow file that you will have to specify in .github/workflows, and you can specify on which events you will have to run the jobs. And a job is nothing but you have to specify the runner, like where it runs on. You can specify it runs on a Ubuntu, Mac, or a Windows machine. And a job has multiple steps, and each of the steps has it executes some actions. So if you understand these concepts, you don't have to actually like use search for a YAML file for particular action. You can build your workflows from scratch if you understand events, jobs, steps, actions, and runners. Right. So to summarize, GitHub Actions is a platform to automate developer workflow, and building workflows from first principles understands what a workflow is, what a job is, what steps are, what actions are, and these are the references. I just want to show an actual action. Just to give me a minute. I'll stop sharing. I'll stop sharing and sharing. Okay, so you're able to see my screen, right? So this is a simple GitHub action that I'm using for one of my projects. So it's basically the screenshots that I showed you. So if you have jobs, and the name of the jobs is build. It runs on Ubuntu latest, which is the runner, and and there are some services you would need before you even attempt to run these jobs. One is a Postgres. You may also need a Redis, which can also be defined. I had Redis defined, but I removed it because I want to make it as simple as possible. Then you have your checkout code, setup Ruby. These are default third-party community provided actions that you can use. Setup node. You can install dependencies. It just runs these commands. Gem install bundler, bundle config, and then sets up the database. You have to provide environment variables for it to set up the database, and it actually runs this, like db create and db migrate. And then finally it just runs some tests. So this I've just given one file to run. I'll show how it works. Um, So, this is how the GitHub Actions UI would look. For every push, there is there is an execution of the workflow, and the workflow, runs the jobs. This is only one job. So in the build, you get into the build, you can see the steps, and inside the steps, it basically uses actions to run. If you look at this, yeah, it's basically running these actions or commands that you have specified. And you could, and it basically um, it it either passes or fails. And if it fails, You could assign a tag here, or you could, as I create an issue and assign it to somebody. Yeah, I mean, these are the things that are possible. Yep, and that's it from my side. Any questions?
Cool. Thanks, Hemanth.
That's it.
Nick, you got a question?
Yep, yep.
Yeah, I'm curious, how do you sort of test that it's doing the thing that you want it to do? Like, I think I saw that you have sort of a certain number of minutes on private projects. Do you just sort of push it up and then see if it behaves, or is there any way to sort of test it locally, or how do you is it just sort of trying to debug line by line?
So it's basically Docker. So you could possibly like run it in Docker and see. But how I have done is just pushed it and seen how see the output here and see if it works. I think most people, even with if you have integrated with other CIs, Circular CI or Travis CI, I don't think we go to the extent of setting up a local environment, because it's just do it once and forget it, right? That's what CI and CD is supposed to be mostly. So I think it's just mostly how I set up, honestly, is trial and error. You push something and you break your head till you get it working. But once you get it working, you're done. You don't have to worry about it. Yeah, honestly, that's how I do it.
Cool. Does anyone else have any questions?
Oh, I have one.
Yeah,
Mike,
Nick,
go
do
for
you want to
it.
go first? Cool. What are some like performance tricks you've got with them? Like in terms of making them like a little bit faster.
Oh yeah,
Any
yeah.
like tips for around that?
Okay. So actually, you can use caching, see, especially for gems or node npm node packages. I had added caching in the file, but it appeared to be complex, and I removed that so that it will be easier to understand. It is very easy to add caching. So as long as you don't change your gem file, the executions are very fast. Is that your question? Like, did I answer your question?
Yeah, that was the one.
Yeah.
I'm using like the same approach for mine. Like, I did try using Alpine images as well in a few places for like Postgres and slightly different Ruby setup, but that was the exact same approach I was using.
I think the bulk of the time is taken in downloading packages. Both npm and gems. So it's better to use caching.
Cool. Nick, do you have a question?
I was going to ask, have you done much in terms of sort of modifying and then committing changes sort of through the actual GitHub action?
Sorry, I didn't get your question, Nick.
So have you used the GitHub Actions to sort of modify and commit changes to your repo?
That'll be meta. That will be meta CI/CD. No, yes, no.
I had a question. This is more of a not so exciting one, but so you have the concept of workflows and jobs, and a workflow can contain many jobs, and a job can contain many steps. Is that right?
Yep.
So when would you, if you wanted to do multiple things, you could put all of those jobs in the same workflow, but when would you need different workflows? I guess if you're, I think I grasp the concepts of it because we use Circle CI and it has a similar concept, but I've never really bothered to drill in why you have the level of workflow and job and steps.
Yeah, I have not used multiple workflow, but I think for simplicity and modularity, because you may want some of the actions to work on when you push something to the repo, and some of the things for when an issue is created. I think it's better to have different workflows for different events, or at least group of events.
Yeah, cool. I was just as you were saying that you could certainly, especially if you had a larger application as well, like it was a mono repo or something, you could also use different workflows for different parts of the app, I suppose, as well. I just never.
It's not just CI/CD. You can
Exactly.
It's just some computing power on the cloud with your code base also available, and all of those context available. So your imagination can run wild, and you can do a lot of things with it. It's not just CI/CD.
Except for mining Bitcoin, as we learned, unfortunately.
You can't do that.
Sure, there's a way. Anyway, great. Thanks, Hemanth. That was cool. I've never actually used GitHub Actions. I just, when it came out, I was like, oh, it looks neat, and then
it's actually good because you don't need another service, and it's mostly free.
Yeah, exactly. That's nice.
And I'm sure if you have a really good use case, they will even extend the limits. You write to them, and they can probably do that.
Cool.